As she prepared dinner that same evening, she thought again about that afternoon as she reached for that same feeling that she had in Chicago, but it refused to come. All she had was a feeling of frustration from Ted's inadequate lovemaking and a growing feeling of guilt. Neither gave her that glow of guilty pleasure she had before from her secret life. That added to her frustration, and for the first time, she wondered if what she had felt in Chicago was simple guilt. She remembered that fleeting voice asking her how she could cheat on Reese. Could it be possible that guilt was that elusive thing she was missing in her perfect life? How absurd that thought was. It was Ted's fault from his failure to satisfy her that afternoon. She still had her secret from Reese and everyone else. After dinner, she felt the frustration of that afternoon working on her, and she determined that she would have Reese make love to her. He knew how to please her, and she always felt relaxed and at peace after that. She needed him tonight. As the girls said their goodnights and headed up to bed, she moved quickly to the family room where Reese was watching TV. She sat down beside him on his big leather couch and rested her head on his shoulder. She rubbed the arm that was between them for a while as she settled against him and then casually moved her hand down to his thigh. She felt him tense but continued to move her hand over his leg. As she started to squeeze, he reached for her hand and moved it away. In shock, Roz watched Reese rise from the couch and, without another word, move away from her and into his den. She heard the door close and the lock click closed. She couldn't move for the longest time until finally, she dropped her head to her hands and began to cry. The tears flooded out and she cried for what seemed like hours. She felt lost, alone, and suddenly afraid. What was wrong with Reese? He couldn't know anything about her, and Ted since nobody else had a clue. She had been very secret, not even telling Sabrina. Reese couldn't know. She convinced herself that he was going through something at work, and she finally calmed enough to get to bed. She slept alone again that night, Reese staying in the den. The following evening, before dinner, Roz cornered Reese in the kitchen and asked him outright what was wrong. He didn't answer at first as he looked away from her, but finally said that he was dealing with a serious problem at work and it was getting to him. "You don't need to continue working there, Reese. You can quit anytime. The remaining share options aren't that important to us, and even if the company tanked, it wouldn't make a difference. You have to walk away from there. It's not fair to me and the girls." Reese just stared at her for a minute, his face clouded in anger to what she had just said, but instead of answering, he finally seemed to sag. "You're right. Maybe I'll finish this last assignment and resign. Phil can take over anytime." "That's wonderful, honey. I can't wait till you're finished with that place. We can do more things together, maybe travel a little, and help the girls decide on colleges. It can be like it used to be." Reese didn't respond, simply smiling before he again walked away into his den. But, with their communicating again, Roz felt more relaxed and less concerned. Business, that's all it was. She was safe, and her secret was safe. Why did she still feel a little twinge of doubt? Their life continued unchanged for the next 3 weeks. Again, Reese was traveling, and when Roz asked him why, he told her it had to do with the client he was working with whose offices were in Chicago. That's where he had been going. She hadn't known. She thought briefly of his call to her that night in Chicago. It was from his cell phone, so she actually didn't know where he was calling from. She dismissed that immediately as a stupid thought. He wasn't there. He was home. Tuesday morning of the 4th week after meeting Ted, he called. He was in town for that day only, and he wanted her to meet him at the same place by 3 o'clock. He had a 5:30 flight, and they would have at least an hour. He wasn't scheduled in Springfield again for the next 4 months, and he didn't think he could wait. Roz hesitated but agreed to drive in to meet him. This was even more of a thrill than planning it in advance. She hung up feeling more alive than she had for the last few weeks. That afternoon with Ted was the last straw. He had been so anxious that he didn't even take the time to try to convince her to give him another bee. He just wanted her lay back on the bed. While she was willing to let him have his way with her, she felt she could at least get some enjoyment out of it. But Ted saw it differently. It took him less than 4 minutes, and Roz never even got close. When he was finished, he jumped up, grabbed his pants, and started to get dressed. When Roz complained, he told her he had booked an earlier flight, and he had to leave for the airport in 15 minutes. He had no more time to spend with her, and he was so sorry. Lie. She was furious with him, but he was ready to leave. She saw he was already packed, and it dawned on her that he just wanted to get and leave. She was just a quick F to him today. As she lay there, Ted walked back into the room, grabbed his suitcase, and turned to the door. "You can let yourself out whenever you're ready. I'll leave the key card on the desk so you can take a shower or whatever. I'll call you when I can get back. Maybe I can make a trip through even if I don't have business. You're certainly worth a trip back to Springfield. Take care, and I'll see you." With that, Ted left the room, and that was that. Roz lay there, trying to determine what had gone wrong with her life. She now realized that the secret she was so gleefully hiding was just a cheap F with a man who treated her like the W she had become. He couldn't even take the time to kiss her hello. He just wanted her to hurry up. Nothing he did was worth the humiliation she now felt. He wasn't even a good lover, and he certainly didn't care about her or her feelings. She began to cry, but the tears were simply self-pity. She finally got up, dressed, and cleaned herself up before leaving the room. As she walked to the elevator, she looked around, fully expecting to see the young lady that she had seen the last time, and she believed now, in Chicago. But there was no woman. Just a man waiting for the elevator, staring at the floor indicator and probably thinking about his next destination. He never looked at her, even as she stood beside him, waiting. She left the hotel and drove home, feeling more depressed than ever. This affair with Ted had to end. She would tell him the next time he called. She would meet him and end it in person. That she owed him. This was a foolish thing she had done, and it certainly accomplished nothing. She had begun to realize that what she was missing in her marriage was something inside her, not something she could find in other places or with other men. She needed help to find out what was bothering her, and she had to seek out that help before she ruined her life and the life of her children and her husband. She made the decision to begin that process tomorrow. That afternoon with Ted was the last straw. He had been so anxious that he didn't even take the time to try to convince her to give him another B. He just wanted her lay back on the bed. While she was willing to let him have his way with her, she felt she could at least get some enjoyment out of it. But Ted saw it differently. It took him less than 4 minutes, and Roz never even got close. When he was finished, he jumped up, grabbed his pants, and started to get dressed. When Roz complained, he told her he had booked an earlier flight, and he had to leave for the airport in 15 minutes. He had no more time to spend with her, and he was so sorry. Lie. She was furious with him, but he was ready to leave. She saw he was already packed, and it dawned on her that he just wanted to get and leave. She was just a quick F to him today. As she lay there, Ted walked back into the room, grabbed his suitcase, and turned to the door. "You can let yourself out whenever you're ready. I'll leave the key card on the desk so you can take a shower or whatever. I'll call you when I can get back. Take care, and I'll see you." With that, Ted left the room, and that was that. Roz lay there, trying to determine what had gone wrong with her life. She now realized that the secret she was so gleefully hiding was just a cheap F with a man who treated her like the W she had become. He couldn't even take the time to kiss her hello. He just wanted her to hurry up. Nothing he did was worth the humiliation she now felt. He wasn't even a good lover, and he certainly didn't care about her or her feelings. She began to cry, but the tears were simply self-pity. She finally got up, dressed, and cleaned herself up before leaving the room. As she walked to the elevator, she looked around, fully expecting to see the young lady that she had seen the last time, and she believed now, in Chicago. But there was no woman. Just a man waiting for the elevator, staring at the floor indicator and probably thinking about his next destination. He never looked at her, even as she stood beside him, waiting. She left the hotel and drove home, feeling more depressed than ever. This affair with Ted had to end. She would tell him the next time he called. She would meet him and end it in person. That she owed him. This was a foolish thing she had done, and it certainly accomplished nothing. She had begun to realize that what she was missing in her marriage was something inside her, not something she could find in other places or with other men. She needed help to find out what was bothering her, and she had to seek out that help before she ruined her life and the life of her children and her husband. She made the decision to begin that process tomorrow. Without anyone knowing what she was doing, Roz made an appointment with a woman psychologist she knew. She went to her first visit the following Friday and decided to lay it all out for her. She wanted to find out what was wrong, and she decided that she had to be brutally honest. So she described her feelings, the first meeting in Chicago and the next 2 meetings here in Springfield. She was honest about how she felt and her lack of satisfaction. She also mentioned Reese's indifference lately. She talked for almost 40 minutes and felt exhausted and empty when she finished. Since it was late, the psychologist, Mrs. Fenton, asked her to come back the following Monday. She said she wanted to do some tests and ask more questions, but she thought she had some ideas already. Roz left feeling hopeful but reserved. Her life was in a mess now, and she was going to need more than ideas to make things right. She had to start with her home life and getting rid of Ted. As if on cue, her cell phone rang. It was Ted. He was going to be in town Monday morning and wanted to see her. He had no meetings planned so they could take their time, and he would make things up to her after the last time. She accepted, but only to end it. She didn't tell Ted this, but only agreed to meet him. She hung up with a satisfied sigh. This was the perfect way to begin. The weekend with Reese and the girls was quiet, and Reese was still withdrawn and out of sorts. She tried several times to engage him in conversation, but he avoided her. At night, she waited, but he never came upstairs to their bedroom, so she was left alone and wondering. She tried to keep things light and open and herself available, but nothing changed. She wrote it out, hoping that next week would see some changes in her and hopefully in Reese. That Monday, Roz met Ted at the hotel as planned. She was sure he was not going to like what she had to say, but it was over. She couldn't do this anymore, and he had to accept it. He had to know how she felt since the last time was a disaster. Not only did she not have it, he had not even been able to make it. He had to force her, and the thing itself was pathetic. It was his fault, she knew, but the guilt and the resulting pain was so intense that she was unable to become aroused. Ted would just have to accept it and move on. Roz knocked on the door and waited. Ted opened it with a smile and beckoned her inside. He closed the door behind her, and she felt his hands on her shoulders. "Ted, please stop. I just came here today to tell you that it's over. We're through, and I won't meet you again. I hope you understand and accept it." "All right. What do you mean it's over? You're here, so let's get it on. I'm ready to play, and you're my plaything. Let's rock and roll."
No.
"Ted, I'm serious. We're through, and that's it. I wanted to tell you face to face, so there's no misunderstanding. No more." "But why? Nothing's changed for me. I thought you liked it and wanted more. What's happened?" "Nothing happened. I just don't want to do this anymore. It's wrong, and I'm sick to death of it. I have to live with my cheating on Reese now, and that's going to be hard. I just want it done with. Why don't you come over her, and let me make you feel good? You know you like what I do for you, right? Please, Ted. This has been fun, all right. Fun for you. It's been a real downer for me. The last time, you couldn't even make me. Remember? That's bull. Come here. Let me show you." "Stop it, Ted. That's it. I'm leaving now, and I don't want to see or hear from you again. Talk to Sabrina the next time you need to stop in. Goodbye." As she turned to walk away, Ted grabbed her from behind, gripping her shoulders as he shoved her against the wall. He pulled on her skirt from behind and forced it down around her ankles. She was trying to fight him by kicking back, hoping to catch him someplace vital, but he was too quick for her. "You'd better stop struggling and making a fuss, cause if you don't, I'm going to tell your old man. You've been teasing me for the past month, and I'm going to collect before you walk out of here." She still continued to try to get free. She knew Ted would carry through on his threat. She was still trying to kick him when she felt him. She wasn't going to let him do that, and she increased her struggles, but to no avail. Roz thought that this was the culmination of her humiliation. This was what she deserved. To be by the man she cheated on her husband with, and not for the first time. She was stupid enough to believe he was a decent man and would listen to her when she told him it was over. He finally moved back with a sigh and let her go. She slid to the floor in shame. "Roz, you always were great. Too bad it's over. I know this is just between us now, so I'll leave you alone as you asked. Now, why don't you get yourself cleaned up and get the F out of here?" Roz stood up, pulled her skirt back up, and straightened her clothing as well as she could. She looked once at Ted and saw nothing but his smirk. Nothing else. She turned and walked out the door without another word. Ted yelled something as she left, but she didn't hear him and didn't care anyway. This disgusting part of her life was over, and not a minute too soon. She ran down the single flight of stairs to her car. As she flew through the back door of the hotel, she almost ran into a woman just entering. Roz glanced at her without recognition, but her tears made everything a blur, and she quickly dismissed her. She sat in her car for some time, trying to calm down and get some degree of control over herself. Her initial excitement with Ted was long gone, replaced by shame and humiliation. That elusive something missing in her life was no longer important. What she had to do now was to find some way of recovering her life, the one that she had forgotten about for too long. Hopefully, Mrs. Fenton would tell her how to begin to make things right. With a sigh, she drove home, not noticing the car that followed her all the way. She entered the home that she had shared with Reese for the last 12 years to clean from her cheating body before he or the girls came home. She stayed in the shower for over 30 minutes, just crying and wondering how in the world she could have fallen to such a low. She didn't seem to be able to get clean and wondered if she ever would again. Finally, she dressed for her session with June Fenton. Her meeting that afternoon with Mrs. Fenton, or June as she was instructed to call her, was not very productive. First, she decided not to tell her of that afternoon and the ER. Then, June wanted to ask a lot of questions, and she hardly referred to the things that Roz had told her last week. Each time Roz mentioned something, June listened but told her not to be too anxious. They would deal with things in their time. Roz finally settled back in defeat and answered the questions that June asked. She saw little sense to most of them, but June appeared to be quite happy. As their session came to an end, June wrote her a prescription for an antidepressant and told her to begin taking them that evening with dinner. She explained that Roz was clinically depressed and had been for some time. These pills should help make things a little easier and give them time to work on correcting the underlying causes. Roz promised to begin right away, and they made an appointment to meet twice a week, beginning that Wednesday. Roz left feeling somewhat more hopeful and stopped to fill the prescription. June told her that they had few side effects and not to worry. Over the next few weeks, she took her pills, went to her sessions, and she stayed home in the evenings and spent as much time with JC and Jada as she could. Sabrina had the business under control, and she told Roz to spend the time with her family. As she did, she noticed something gradually growing in her. It was the love of her daughters and their joy in everything they said and did. She had forgotten all of that for a time and found herself beginning to relate to them again. She began to notice what they were doing and who they were seeing and where they were going, and she watched as they took it all in stride and enjoyed it all. She found herself enjoying it with them. It was all so simple. Just live and enjoy what you had. She found that she was less and less unhappy and woke one morning surprised to find that empty place she had been trying to fill, mostly full. Only her relationship with Reese was a problem, and that was the last missing piece. She waited one evening after the girls had gone to their rooms for the night before walking into his den. He had been spending almost all of his time in the evenings in there. As she walked in, she saw him dozing in his chair, the TV on low and tuned to a sports channel. She walked over to the chair across from him that she often used, sat, and just watched him. She took in his hair, noticing more gray than she had in the past. She looked at the face she had lived with for over 17 years and was surprised to find some fine lines, new and somehow attractive. She saw that he had lost some of his belly recently and wondered how. She saw the man that she loved and wondered again why she had forgotten that. He was enough for her, more than enough. He made love to her, he did for her. He was always there for her, and he was all that she could ask for. He was enough. Why had it taken her so long to realize that? Without waking him, she left the room and went to their bedroom. She realized that they hadn't made it since the Sunday night before she went to the seminar. That had been over 12 weeks now. She tried to remember the last time either had suggested it and found to her surprise that Reese hadn't since that night. She had tried on several occasions, but Reese had found some excuse. Why had she not noticed that before this? Why had Reese not come to her? Why had he not wanted to make love to her? She had no answers, and that scared her. Scared her to death. She undressed slowly and crawled under the covers. She began to cry to herself as she remembered again what she had done. As she slowly calmed down, she began to drift off to sleep. The last thought she had was, what if he knew? As things continued without change, she tried to find the passion and love that she used to feel and tried to rebuild their love life. The problem was that every time she prepared to make the suggestion to Reese, She felt the guilt and deceit sour her intention, leaving her unable to make the overture. As a result, she remained unavailable to Reese, in part because he never initiated it himself. She wondered what was going to happen to them if things continued this way. So many nights she cried herself to sleep knowing that Reese was still downstairs in his den, avoiding her. Time passed and things remained the same. She was making little progress with her sessions, and she had stopped taking the pills since they made her so very tired. One good thing was that she and the girls had completely returned to their previous relationship, and she found herself more and more comfortable with them. They were again mother and daughters, and they shared many things. If only she could find the key to her life with Reese. Roz had been working at the kitchen table on a new menu for an upcoming catering job when Reese came in to get a beer. He had been working in the den for the past hour. Roz thought he seemed tired and distracted recently, but that was nothing new. As VP of Hadley Controls, his job often carried an extra burden when the customer needed the compliance work done quickly in order to gain a permit. "You look tired, honey. Why don't you give it a rest tonight and work on it with a fresh eye tomorrow? I can fix you a snack, and we can take it out on the deck. I think the girls are out of the pool, so it would just be you and I and a bunch of munchies. How about it? I know, Roz, but I have to get this damn thing done so that Harrison and crew can take the plan up to Chicago next week. If I don't do it now, it won't get done. Phil is on vacation for the rest of the week to attend his daughter's wedding, so it's me or nobody." Roz just shook her head in frustration, but tried to give it another shot. "Still, an hour off won't make or break the deal. Come on out on the deck and bring your beer with you." Reese looked for a minute as though he might take her up on her offer, but instead just grimaced and shook his head no. He took his beer and walked back to the den, leaving her to return to her menu. Not surprised, she watched him go. He had been avoiding her more and more lately. She was unsure of herself, so she hadn't made it a point to talk to him. She decided to let it go and wait till he seemed ready to talk. For his part, Reese wanted to take the time with her, but this job was too important to let slide. He knew that he was avoiding the inevitable, but he just didn't have the will to do it now. How long he could let it go was the question. It had been over 3 months now. It had to be dealt with soon, or it was going to eat him alive. For the 100th time, he decided to postpone it until this job was finished. Everything was in place, and all he had to do was sign the papers. Then he would do it, for sure. Roz, on the other hand, couldn't figure out the recent coldness in Reese. He had been this way now since she had returned from the seminar in Chicago, and she had no idea of what could be bothering him. She was spending more time at home, and she hadn't worked any evenings at all. She had tried everything she could think of to get him to talk to her, but this was usually the result. She wouldn't face the possibility that he knew about her. How could he live with her if he knew? She knew that he wouldn't accept what she had done. He couldn't. They had that conversation so many times in the past, and both had agreed that infidelity wasn't something that either could accept. Again, she asked herself, how then had she done it? She couldn't even begin to understand what she had been going through at the time, only that it seemed important that she find something to fill her up. Ruth seemed to be avoiding that question, saying it was too soon to find those answers. Nothing changed for the next 3 weeks until one night Reese came home from work with a new attitude. When Roz noticed the change, she wondered about it until finally, after the girls had gone to bed, she could stand it no more. She followed him into the family room and sat down across from him. "All right, Reese. What's going on? I know something is different, but I don't know what." Reese looked at her, face calm and a slight smile on his face. She noticed that the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Well, several things, Roz. First, I finished the job and all compliance requirements were met on time and to the satisfaction of the client. I turned everything over to Phil last week and I resigned, effective today." "Reese, you resigned? Finally? I am so happy that you finally did it. You must feel wonderful. Congratulations, honey." "Thanks. I do feel great, and it has been some time coming. I was the last of the big 4 to resign. Don't know why it took so long, but now it's done." "What else? You said there were several things." Roz was beginning to relax a little, since apparently this was going to be good news. She began to smile. "Well, this one is something that I have been putting off for a while, but now it's time. Tomorrow, you'll be served with divorce papers. I signed them today, and copies have been filed with the court. You will find yourself well taken care of, but the terms will not necessarily make you happy. The shock was so great that she was unable to even blink for several seconds. She felt the blood rush to her head, and the roaring in her ears was so loud, she missed all of what he said after divorce papers. She felt sick to her stomach, and her heart was pounding so loud Reese had to hear it. She tried to focus on his face, but her eyes were unable to see. She was having trouble breathing, and her breath was coming in short gasps. She finally heard a sound, like a high-pitched keening coming from somewhere before realizing it came from her. Reese was watching her face as he told her of his intent, and he knew the precise moment when she lost control. He watched her eyes as they literally glazed over. She was gasping for breath, and she was making a low sound that irritated him. He stopped talking since she obviously wasn't listening, stood and walked into the den. There was no pity for her in him now. She had driven it all out. She was still sitting there some time later when she was finally able to make sense of her surroundings. Reese had apparently left sometime during her fugue. She slowly got up from her chair and went in search of Reese. She finally found him in his den, sitting in his favorite chair and listening to a recording of Enya. She walked over to the chair across the room from him and sat down heavily. "Can you tell me why you are doing this? What do you know, and what are your reasons? You must know that having an affair with Ted Hill was not going to be acceptable to me. Why would you not expect me to divorce you over that? We both understood the vows we made, and we discussed them several times. You broke them. That's number one. How long have you known? If you knew about it, you must know that it was very short, and that it has been over for months. Why now? Why did you wait, leaving me in misery wondering when or if you would find out? Initially, I was waiting for you to confess to me and to ask me if we could work it out. As time went on, I realized that you were continuing with your affair and were not going to be honest with me, so I had to do something. Divorce was not something I wanted to do. I think I still love you even now, but I needed the time to try to accept what you did. I found that I just couldn't. I waited, hoping I could find some way to forgive you, but I just wasn't able to. Divorce is the only way for me. Reese, I am so sorry for what I did, but you have to know that it was just a brief, stupid mistake in what have been 17 wonderful years. I made a mistake, but it's over. It meant nothing, and it can never happen again. I want you to listen to me, and I want to try to explain why I did what I did. I need for you to understand. Please, Reese, I need to tell you. I'm sorry, Rosalind, but I don't really care why you did it. I tried to give you everything I could. I gave you money, a home, 2 wonderful children. I showed you I loved you in every way that I could. It wasn't enough. You took it all and wanted more. I couldn't give you more, so you went elsewhere. Why isn't important? It would just be your attempt to make what was ugly less ugly. Roz finally understood that what she had feared was now real. She feared this day would come. She knew deep down in her soul the first night she spent with Ted that this was going to be the result. Hoping and praying couldn't change the outcome, and she knew it. Her lies and deceit had built her new home. Now she had to live with them. Will you at least let me tell you why I did what I did? If it makes no difference, what harm is there in letting me say what I have to say? Please.
Fine.
Say what you want to, and then I can finish this. It all started when I went back to work. I had everything any woman could want, but it didn't seem to be enough. I wanted to work to prove myself, to show you that I could be successful and do something you would be proud of. Reese responded to that comment in anger. You never needed to do that for me. Don't try to make this about me. I never asked you to be anything other than what you were, wife and mother and best friend. The anger hurt, but Roz was determined to try to make him understand. I know that now. I think I used you as a rationalization for some of the things I did. I know you asked me for nothing, and I know that you loved me and our children without question. I just put that aside. When my business became so successful, I began to want more and more. The successes we had were good, but not enough to make that craving inside me go away. I think I wanted to do what you had done, so I looked for ways to make it happen. The seminars helped since I could mingle with other people, and the compliments I got, both professionally and personally, helped. But with each compliment, I needed more. The first time with Ted was the night you called me and asked me who I was with. I was so angry at you for questioning me that I decided then and there to punish you. Looking back, I can't even remember why I thought that, but that's not important. When Ted asked me to go to his room, I went, Not for me, but to punish you. Why I stayed with him that night I still can't answer. I knew that Sabrina would know what I did and that I would know what I did, but I didn't care. Even then, when I did go back to the room, Sabrina was asleep, so I went into the bathroom and closed the door. I stared at myself in the mirror, not even recognizing myself, but the feeling was one of euphoria. I still don't understand that. Reese sat quietly while she told him her sad tale of woe. He had no expression on his face and just waited. She knew that her words were hurting him, but she also knew she had to tell him the truth. It was the least she owed him. I didn't repeat my mistake the next night, but I made arrangements with Ted the next day to meet him here in Springfield when he came through. He usually made the trip once or twice a month, so we made plans for the next time he came. We met that way 3 more times after the first time in Chicago. I know you don't want to know this, but Ted was not a good or patient lover. He was selfish and he was not very skilled. I never enjoyed him as a lover, especially compared to you. You and I made love, and it was always wonderful. Ted F'd me, and it was not even that good. It was never about the S, only the feeling of doing something that nobody else knew about and having something of my own that was separate and apart from us that you didn't know about. At first, it made me feel smug and self-confident. I looked at you and thought about my secret. At first it gave me a thrill, but that thrill soon began to pale. After the first time here in a cheap motel, the thrill became dirty. The second time was even worse, so the third time he came through, I went to his room to end it. I wondered then why I had done this thing. I was missing something in my life, or so I told myself, but what it was really was nothing more than greed. I simply wanted more than I had, and for no other reason than selfishness. I had it all and I wanted more. I will never understand that, and it may take a long time for me to find out, but I will. I am seeing someone now, and we are trying to find out why I did something so stupid and destructive. I will find out what that disease was that destroyed me and cut it out. I have tried since to be the wife you married, but my guilt and remorse spoiled every attempt that I made. We couldn't even make love without me feeling guilty. I couldn't enjoy the man I loved because of what I had done to him. People always say that a guilty spouse tries to make it up by being extra S and loving, but I don't know how. The guilt destroyed me. It never made me better, and it made it impossible to give myself to you. That was it. She was done and had told him everything. Too little, too late. She knew that now. All she could do was wait for the other shoe to fall. Her life with Reese was over. It was up to him to finish it. Reese sat there watching her. She had said all she wanted to say, but nothing she said was new or made any difference. He looked inside and found the pain and the anger and the need for revenge undiminished. It was just as strong and cold as it was when he first found out. He wondered briefly where the love had gone. He searched but couldn't find it. He waited until the silence grew uncomfortable for her, and then he finished. That is quite a story. You are right in thinking I wouldn't understand. I don't, and I didn't when I first found out. You were so foolish. Like most cheaters, you were so sure of yourself that you never even tried to disguise your deceit. You took me for a fool, and you both set out to humiliate me. You may say that isn't true with Ted Hill, but men like Hill have big mouths. He made no secret that he had my wife. To him, you were just another of his conquests. Another wife was the term he used. You might ask how I found out? You never noticed that loving couple that rode the elevator with you that first night in Chicago? You didn't notice them standing in the hall as you PR yourself that first night? I guess you had other things on your mind, but you were already under surveillance by then. Ironically, I thought you were cheating on me earlier when you were really only working, but I didn't know that then, so I began having you watched. He watched the realization light her face as she remembered that night. That loving couple was part of his surveillance of her that began ironically 3 weeks before that, when she was spending more time as the storefront rather than come home. They found nothing then, but he continued the surveillance through Chicago and then after. I knew the first time you slept with Ted, and I knew about every other time you met him. I knew times, dates, and places. I even know how long you were with him on each occasion. You let me know some time ago that I was no longer enough for you, so I wanted to find out what Ted was doing for you. I wasn't impressed. Reese stopped and shook his head in disgust. This wasn't what he wanted to do. He had no need to vent his anger on her. He had taken steps to be sure she would pay for what she had done. That was what he needed to concentrate on. Making her pay. But that's not the point. I told you that I needed to finish this. Beside divorcing you, I have made sure that Ted Hill was fired today. He was terminated, his belonging removed from the building, the lease on his car canceled, and his lease on his apartment revoked. He will not be given a recommendation from his current place of employment and will never work in this state again. And he is being told why and warned not to make an issue of it. I have many connections, as you know, and I called in some debts. Mr. Hill was just as guilty as you, and he is going to pay big time. At the mention of Ted and his termination, Roz hunched her shoulders more and tears began to fall. She was understanding the consequences of her actions, and she understood deep in her soul the reasons why Reese had to do this. The responsibility fell more on her than on Ted, but he would also pay the price. One last thing. When you and Sabrina set the company up, you asked for my help and advice. Remember we had it incorporated and shares issued? You and Sabrina had 45% each and I had 10% as well as a board seat. You both wanted me to have the power to break a tie. My participation was silent since you never needed me, but I was still a partner. Well, I approached Sabrina and Paul and made Sabrina an offer she couldn't refuse. I bought her 45%, giving me 55%. Part of the deal was for her not to tell you. I then controlled the lights in time. Since our problems began with that venture, I needed to do something about it for my own satisfaction. I contacted one of your competitors and sold them my 55% control. You are now owned by Catering Concerns Incorporated. They intend to absorb the name and the clientele, and as a condition of the sale, they will have no need for your participation. You are now the minority stockholder in CC Incorporated. You no longer have a job, as this letter attests. Reese handed her a copy of the sale, a notarized copy of the transfer of Sabrina's stock to him, and a letter informing Roz of termination of her active involvement in the venture. She took them without comment. The final item is the girls. I know that you were a good mother to them while they were growing up, but recently, you turned your back on them for a time. Since I have eliminated the reasons for that, I hope you can learn to be that to them again, and I think it best if you have full custody. I intend to give you this house and sufficient funds to continue to live here after the divorce. The girls will be taken care of, and their college trusts have been funded in full for some time. There are advantages to being rich, and we are. That is, we were. I still am, but you are no longer my beneficiary. I have canceled all of our joint accounts, but the money I am giving you will be enough to take care of expenses, all requirements for food and clothing and medical expenses, but there will be no largesse. If you want money for yourself or your future lovers, you will have to earn it. Reese paused again to see if Roz was listening. He wasn't prepared for the look of total defeat on her face. He expected crying, screaming, and begging, but she was simply quiet and sad. It was no longer as much fun as he thought it was going to be to punish her, but he was going to finish it. It had to be done. I hope you won't contest this divorce. I expect you to sign the papers changing the beneficiary rights, but you should get yourself a lawyer to protect your other assets. I will not hesitate to fight dirty if you try to contest. I have all of the dirt on your affair, and I'll make it public and will use it in court. It's up to you. Talk to the girls if you want. Once I leave, I have no intention of ever discussing this with you again. This is the last time you and I will sit together and talk as husband and wife. Until further notice, all communication will be through our lawyers. I'll talk to the girls by myself, and I won't tell them anything about your infidelity. That is up to you. I'll tell them that we simply grew apart and chose to separate. That's all they'll hear from me. I'm moving out tonight, and I will send for my things later. I'll let you know where to send stuff, and I will let the girls know as well. Roz listened to all of this without a word. She was deeply shocked to see the depths of cruelty that she had forced on Reese. He had destroyed her in every way imaginable, physically, emotionally, and professionally. He had taken everything of importance from her except their children. He understood very well how to hurt her in ways that were the most painful. She had tears to shed, but that would come later. She had no words of anger. They weren't justified. She had no excuses. They were all inadequate. In spite of what he was doing, she had nothing but love for Reese and all she was losing, but she understood that it was not enough now. It was, however, all she had left to hold on to. It seemed that he had finished. He was done. Now that he had destroyed her world, she had to let him know how she felt. It was important to her, even if it made no difference. This is your choice, Reese, and I understand why you have to hurt me. I am sorry I pushed you into doing something so unlike you. I appreciate you not telling the girls, but they have to know the truth, so I'll tell them myself. I don't want your money since it obviously never made me happy. I don't care about the house since it also wasn't enough, but it is important to the girls. It should be clear to you that these things were never an issue. I had them and it made no difference. Maybe that's why you're giving them to me. Roz rose to walk about the den. She was calm now. The end had come and she would survive it. Somehow. I wish you hadn't needed to punish Ted, but I understand your need to do so. I guess you're right. He knew I was married, but I guess a free piece of was not something he was going to pass up. He forgot while I was behaving like a cheap ass to him. I was your wife, and in your eyes, he took something he wasn't entitled to. I know that now. Ted was just another casualty of my need for something I didn't understand. It may seem strange to hear me say this, but I do know what I did wrong. I forgot my pledge to you 17 years ago. I said it then and I meant it. Regardless of my issues, I should never have broken those vows. How I forgot it is something that I still don't understand. What you have given me over those 17 years is precious to me, and I will cherish it forever, even if you are gone. I still have the girls to remind me of what we had and what we shared. I make only one promise to you. If you ever find it in your heart to forgive me, I will be here waiting. There will never be anyone else for me. You can say whatever you wish, but this is my choice and I have made it. It makes no difference to me whether you believe it or not. It is my promise to myself as well, and I will honor it, more than I honored our marriage. Roz looked for the last time at Reese, sitting in his chair in his den. The den that he had occupied for the last 12 years. She knew that it was going to be hard on him to leave this place regardless of what he said about it not being his home now. They had made love one night in this room. She could remember it so clearly now. It had been a joyful coming together after a wonderful night out with friends. That's all it was, just them enjoying each other. She remembered it now, too late. That joy they shared. The joy she had for him and their family. It was all the world to her then. Where had it gone? How had she let it slip away from her for that brief time? As these thoughts came flooding in, Roz turned and fled the room, tears pouring out of eyes squeezed shut in pain. She had promised herself that she would wait until Reese had left, but it had begun. So soon. It was not fair that she had to pay this horrible of a price for a mistake. Time passed and the divorce became final. True to his word, Reese had not spoken to her during that time. Although he had spent a lot of time with the girls at his new place and out for dinner or school functions, Reese made sure they never met and scheduled events so that only one or the other was there. JC and Jada told her what they did and how he looked, but he had made it clear to them that he wasn't interested in anything about her. That's the way he wanted it. When Roz told the girls what had happened and how she had been unfaithful to their father, they were angry and resentful for a long time. They blamed her for destroying their family, but with Reese patiently talking to them and Roz apologizing and trying to explain to them what had happened, they slowly came to forgive her and life got back to some degree of normal. Once the divorce was final, Reese told the girls that he was buying a small plane and intended to travel. He had had his pilot's license for some time, but rarely got to use it. Now that he was retired and divorced, he intended to make the most of it. JC told Roz one evening after returning from a visit to Reese's place that he was leaving the next day and planned to be gone for some time. He promised to call every night and tell the girls where he had been. The girls weren't upset since they had their own lives now and didn't need to visit with either of their parents much. They were growing up. JC was now 16 and Jada had just turned 14.